Mr. President, many thanks for your time.
You're most welcome in Damascus.
Thank you. Let me start with maybe a personal question. You are a doctor. In 2011, you said, and I quote you, that you had chosen eye surgery because it's almost never an emergency and there is very little blood. It was March 2011, the very time when the Syrian war broke out. The bloodiest conflict in the world nowadays, one big emergency. How do you take that?
If you want to make a relation between this job or any surgery job and what's going on in Syria, it depends on the intention. You always have blood in surgery, but you have blood to save the life of the patient, not to kill him. While the blood that we have in Syria is to kill the Syrians by the terrorists, and our job as a government is to save their life through destroying the terrorists. This is the only link, and I hope I understand your question well.
Yeah. I mean, like.
So our job is to save the life. So if you have a blood, is in order to defend your country. You use your army, you use your armaments to defend your country.
But 250,000 people, it's unimaginable in any country.
This is the result when you have a lot of terrorism supported by regional power and by the West. It's not only terrorists coming from within Syria, terrorists coming from more than 100 countries around the world. They wanted to make Syria a hub for terrorism, and that's the natural situation. And if we wouldn't defend our country, that number would be many folds.
You mentioned terrorism. It seems that in recent days there have been a huge development in the Syrian crisis. What do you think was more important date for development of this crisis? September 30th and the Russian intervention, or November 13th, the Paris terror attacks?
No, definitely the Russian participation, or what they announced as a front against the terrorism. This is the most important because this is the practical thing against terrorism. While in Paris, what's happening on the political level is just to dissipate the feeling of the French, like saying the French are going to attack ISIS in very different way. So what does it mean that? Wasn't they serious before the attack on Paris? So they're going to only dissipate the feeling of the French, nothing serious, while the Russians are very serious in fighting terrorism, and there's cooperation between them and the Syrian army.
So you don't think that actually the increase of attacks on the Western coalition or the Grand Coalition under the US leadership is not helping?
Since the beginning of that coalition, if you want to talk about facts, not opinion, since the beginning of that coalition, ISIS has expanded and the recruits from around the world has increased. While since the participation of the Russian in the same fight, so-called against terrorism, ISIS has been shrinking, and al-Nusra, of course, and the other terrorist groups. So this is reality. The facts are telling.
Isn't that because, military speaking, simply the Russian Air Force could work as Air Force of Syrian army?
Because there's cooperation, that's what I said. You cannot destroy terrorism from the air. You cannot. That's impossible. The American has been trying this in Afghanistan for how long? More than 12 or 13 years. Did they achieve anything? Nothing. The terrorism is still strong in Afghanistan. So you cannot. You need cooperation from within that country. Any power. But the major power in Syria is the Syrian army and, of course, the government.
French president is trying to get together a broader coalition against terrorism. Are you skeptical about his efforts?
Definitely. If they wanted to learn from what happened in Paris recently, why didn't they learn from Charlie Hebdo? The same principle, the same concept. And we said at that time that this is only the tip of the iceberg. What's under the water is much bigger. They didn't learn. This is first. Second, you cannot fight terrorism while you are supporting the terrorists directly with armaments and having alliance with the staunchest supporters of terrorism in the world, which is the Saudi kingdom. You cannot. This is contradiction. You cannot the police and the thief at the same time. You have to choose either way to stand.
But I didn't hear about any Western supplies to al-Nusra or Islamic State.
You have them on the internet, very clear. French and other, of course, different made arms. But the French missiles are existed. How could a country like France sell such weapons to a destination that it doesn't know or that they don't know where to go. It's impossible. They know through Saudi, through Qatar, and maybe through other countries, definitely.
There was an incident on Turkish borders, a downed Russian bomber. Do you think this incident would influence the outcome of this French president's efforts to create a broader coalition? Do you think it will complicate even the peace talks in Syria?
I don't think so, but I think it has shown the real intention of Erdogan, who, let's say, lost his nerve just because the Russian intervention has changed the balance on the ground. So the failure of Erdogan in Syria, the failure of his terrorist groups, means his political demise. So he wants to do anything in order to put obstacles in front of any success. So he did it, but I don't think it's going to change any balance. The war against terrorism is continuing. The Russian support and participation is going to be stronger. It is stronger anyway. And I think there's no way back in that regard, whether he do it again this way or another way.
US president is saying he doesn't want to repeat the same mistake, to make a ground invasion without actually knowing who will fill in the vacuum. Yeah. Most of the presidential candidates in recent elections are saying that they want to do much more than just bombing. What do you think is more realistic approach which will lead to actually defeating the Islamic State?
Actually, if you want to talk about the terrorism in Syria, not only is ISIS, you have let's say, axis or multi-aspect solution. It's part of it is related to the ideology, part of it related to the economy, to the political stance, political cooperation, and the last thing is security, cooperation, and fighting directly. Because of the situation that we are in now, there's no way but to fight them directly. But this is not enough. You need, first of all, now, if you want to fight them and defeat them, you have to cut and suffocate their supplies, armaments, money, and recruits that are coming mainly through Turkey and with the support of the Saudi and Qatari. This is the first step you take while you are attacking them on the ground. The problem now that we are fighting the terrorists, but they have unlimited supply, unwarranted supply from many different countries, mainly regional, with the support or overlooking of the West, or some of the Western countries, to be precise.
You said that your priority is to defeat terrorists before political solution. What do you mean by defeat the terrorism? That there will be no armed opposition groups in Syria left?
You cannot talk about opposition in the political sense while they are holding arms. You know, in your country, when you talk about opposition, it's only political movement first. Second, if it's political, it should have a grassroots. So when we talk about rebels, militants who are holding guns and any other armaments to attack people, to attack Syrian army, to destroy any public property or private properties and so on, this is terrorism. There's no other definition. So we don't accept the term of militant opposition or military opposition or moderate opposition having armaments. This is not opposition, this is terrorism. Opposition for us is the political movement. Outside Syria, inside Syria, doesn't matter. Of course, the other aspect of the opposition is to be patriotic, not be opposition while it's formed in France or in Qatar or Saudi Arabia or USA or whatever, or in UK. It should be Syrian, formed in Syria, and we have Syrian opposition. We have real Syrian opposition. How big, how strong, this is another issue. So defeating the terrorism is removing obstacles from the way of any political process we want to take. Now, if you agree upon any steps or procedures with any opposition in the world, Syrian opposition, I mean, what can you achieve? Can you make real elections? Can you bring stability with the opposition? They're not, because the terrorists have their own world, they have their own goals, they have their own agenda and ideology. It's completely different from the political part. So if you start with the political process, we have to start it. I didn't say we don't start it. I said if you want to make concrete steps, it should be after we start defeating the terrorism. I didn't say after we defeat, because the defeat is a long process.
I see a major problem over here. In Vienna, there have been talks about moderate opposition, even including the armed groups. You are saying no talks to anybody who is with weapons.
No, the political process has two aspects. One of them is to deal with the political opposition. The other aspect is to deal with those groups, making what you call in Syria reconciliation. When they give up their arms and go back to their normal life, the government offered them amnesty. So this is a new...
But on your terms?
No, it's amnesty. You go back to your normal life. There's no term. Amnesty is full amnesty. You're not charged with any conviction. You're free to live your normal life, but go back to your normal life, peaceful life. Don't fight, don't hold machine gun, don't terrorize people. So this reconciliation has succeeded in Syria. Actually, it has achieved more than any political process. So we don't say we don't deal with those terrorists. If they want to change their position, of course we have to deal with them. But when you talk about ISIS and al-Nusra and al-Qaeda offshoots, they are not ready to give up their armament. They are not ready to make negotiation with the government anyway. So they don't accept, and of course we don't accept because their ideology is, again, the government is against the whole country. You know, they don't recognize borders. They don't recognize the other Syrians who are not like them. So it's difficult, it's impossible to make any reconciliation with them. But I'm talking about the other groups who terrorize for the money, maybe for honor, for fear, for any other reason. We succeeded in making negotiation with them.
So if Vienna talks actually were mentioning the talks between the government and the opposition groups within maybe 1 month by the end of the year, you are completely okay with that?
Since the beginning of this crisis, we said we are ready to make negotiations with anyone. So whether this group, we know that he's related to the French, not to the Syrian, and so on, we deal with him as opposition that represents that country. Because the Syrian knows the reality. So we're not against any kind of cooperation or dialogue or negotiations. Dialogue is the more precise word. But at the end, if you make agreement with those opposition that they don't have grassroots in Syria, what would you achieve? That's the question, simple question. We can make negotiation for 4 months. Then at the end, who's going to implement if they don't have any influence on the terrorists and they don't have grassroots, they don't implement the Syrian? What's the meaning of that meeting? So in principle, we don't say no, we say yes, but in reality, we cannot tell the people lies saying that this is the hope that we have, this is how we're going to solve the problem. No, that's not true.
How do you describe this conflict? Is it like a government against freedom fighters? Is it Shia versus Sunni? Is it Arabs, Turkey against Persia? Is it clash of superpowers? Is it like clash between secular state and religious fanatics? What is it?
It has every factor that you mentioned, but not all of them are real. I mean, if you want to talk about the real feeling of the Syrian, for example, if you take the sectarian factor that you mentioned, no, that's not true, because if you go around now, anywhere in Syria, in the areas under the control of the government, you can see all the colors, ethnic and sectarians of the Syrian society. So that's not true. Otherwise, people will not live with each other. So this is not the case. But the sectarian hatred has been stoked by the Saudi and the Qatari, and you always have those fanatics that listen to this kind of rhetoric. But this is not reality. Actually, it is government against rebels who has been supported by different regional power and international power that they have nearly the same agenda, maybe different incentive, but the same agenda. They want to change the government. They want to topple the government and the state in Syria, and they want to change that president and that government and the whole political system without going back to the Syrian people. This is the real fight. So even if you talk about rebels, they don't have any agenda, because we had negotiations with them. They don't have any political requirement or request. They only have money. They are like mercenaries, most of them, who wanted to fulfill the agenda of the others. So this is the real fight. The appearance, Russia supported the government because they support the international law and the stability in the region, and their stability, the stability of the whole region and the world. The United States, always, they are looking for the hegemony of the American over the world, because Syria is independent, they don't accept country that say no to them, and so on. But in reality, the government, with the support of the majority of the Syrian people, again, those mercenaries supported by those countries.
On a more personal level, there have been really interesting evolution of your public perception, especially in the West. I mean, like from being the hope for your country to being one of the world's chief villains, now becoming again the part of equation sine qua non in Syria. How did you live through all this evolution?
How are the evolution?
Evolution from being the hope for your country to be the
You mean before the crisis?
Yeah, I mean like to persona non grata now, and now again, I mean like everybody's counting on you again for the future in Syria.
If you look at the relation with the West, in 2005, I was the killer. In 2008, and after, I was peacemaker. Then in 2011, I became the butcher. Now, there's some positive change, of course, shy kind of change, not the explicit one.
So how do you take it personally? How do you live through that?
Personally, it has no influence for one reason, because nobody is taking the Western officials seriously anymore. For many reasons. First of all, they don't have credibility. Second, they don't have vision. They are so shallow. Third, they're not independent. They're going to follow the Americans at the end. So they're not serious. They don't exist on the map now. Most of the Europeans. We look at the master. The master is the Americans. So personally, has no influence. At the end, they are telling life. For me, especially when you're in a situation or in a state of war, what you care about is what the Syrian people, the way the Syrian people look at you. This is very important for me. While the others, I don't care. So if we talk about the fluctuation of this behavior, the European behavior towards Syria, or toward me personally, this is up and down, but I haven't changed. I'm still the same one since I became president in 2000. So you have to ask them why they are fluctuating, not me.
So the message to the West is there was no indiscriminate killing of civilians in the beginning of the civil war. There was no massive torturing of opponents of the regime.
Let's presume that this is correct according to their propaganda. How could you have the public support and stay in your position for 5 years while you have the strongest country in the world against you, while you have the richest countries in the world against you, and your population that you are killing them against you? How can you stand here? That's unrealistic. So you should have support. How could you have public support of your people while you are killing them? Can you explain? You cannot. I cannot. So that's not true. If we want to talk about the casualty, any war is a bad war. There's no good war, even if it's for good cause, but it's a bad war. So you have to avoid it. But when you cannot, war is about killing, armaments is about killing. You always have casualties, you always have innocents in any war during the history. But while to have the intention, what do we get if we kill our population? How do you kill them while you want their support?
What do you feel when you see the pictures of hundreds of thousands of your fellow Syrians fleeing to Europe?
The feeling is very sad, especially if you think about every person of those Syrians who left Syria has a sad story behind him. It reflects the hardship of the Syrian during the crisis. From, let's say, a rational way of looking at the situation, it's a loss. Every one of those is the human resources that left Syria. So that will undermine your society in your country, definitely. But at the end, we have to deal with the reasons. The question that I think every European should ask, why did they leave? For many reasons. The first one is the terrorism that's been attacking them everywhere, either directly or through attacking the basic requirements of living in our country. So infrastructure, their way of life, basic needs, and so on. The second one is the European embargo. The European embargo played into the hands of the terrorists directly. Every embargo is against the population of any country. Many people left Syria because they cannot live anymore. They don't have the basic living, the basic needs of living, so they had to leave to Europe or to Turkey or any other country.
But there are those who say that you failed them.
I failed them. I didn't destroy the infrastructure. I didn't give armament to the terrorists to kill and to destroy. Actually, the question, who did that? The West and the Saudi and the Qatari.
What should Europe do now? I mean, like, should Europeans fear those people or help them?
That depends. First of all, a big part or large swath of them is not Syrian. About the Syrians, it's a mixture. The majority, let's say, the good Syrian, the patriot, the natural people. But of course, you have the infiltration of the terrorists among them. That's true. How much, how many, we cannot tell. It's difficult to tell. But this is reality. And I think you have some evidence on the internet, photos, videos that prove that same terrorists who've been killing people here and beheading sometimes left to Europe as peaceful citizens.
but generally speaking, help or fear?
That depends on how Europe should deal with them, because you're talking not only about terrorism, you're talking about culture. Even before the crisis, before this flood of refugees going to your country, the problem in Europe is how to integrate those cultures in your society. And I think Europe has failed. Whether it's related to Europe from one aspect to the way they deal with the situation, or because the Wahhabi institutions spend their money on skewing the interpretation of the Muslim, now I'm talking about the Muslim in Europe, and created more problems and extremism in your country. Actually, this region used to export sometimes some extremism to Europe. In our crisis, Europe is exporting extremism to us. So it depends how we're going to deal with it, and I don't think it's going to be easy to make integration.
How you see yourself in this conflict? You say your enemies are terrorists, fanatics, foreign agents. What is the most precious thing you are trying to protect?
In our country?
Yeah.
Secularism. Because Syria is a melting pot. Of course, secularism in Syria is different from the way some in the West, especially in France, maybe, understand it to be against religion. Actually, secularism in Syria is to have freedom of religions and sects and ethnicities. Without this, you won't have Syria that you know for centuries. So this is the most important thing that we can try to protect. The second thing is the moderation. Because of this variety of different factors in this society for centuries, you have moderations. Without this moderation, you cannot hit this melting pot. What the terrorists are working on now is to create a new generation that they know nothing about moderation, that they're going only to be killers, extreme, fanatics, don't accept the other. In a few years' time, this is going to be a real danger. How can we deal with the new generation? It's not about somebody who's 20 and above. It's maybe 20 and below. This is the real challenge that we're going to face.
Is there anything you wouldn't do to protect those values you mentioned?
No, you should do everything to protect your country. You cannot protect your country if you don't protect the society and the principles and the values of that society. You cannot. Country is not only land and borders. It's people. It's a way of thinking.
If you had a chance to change one decision you made in those past 5 years, what would that be?
Many people that we trust that we shouldn't have trusted. This is the biggest problem within Syria and outside Syria. Like Erdogan, for example, in the past. Many Syrians during the conflict that we discovered that they are fanatic, that they belong to extreme ideology like Muslim Brotherhood, and some of them belong to Al-Qaeda, and now they are holding guns and fighting. At the very beginning, we thought they are working for their country. This is the main issue. While if you want to talk about the strategic thing that we took, it was based on 2 pillars. The first one is dialogue. The second one is fighting terrorism. These 2 pillars will not change them, will never change them.
Even maybe the balance between those 2 pillars?
You cannot talk about the balance because you have reality changing every day. So a dialogue should continue to the maximum, and fighting terrorism should continue to the maximum. Actually, there's correlation between them, with each other, not against each other. So you don't need this balance. You need to go to the maximum with both, in parallel, in tandem.
Let's come for a minute to Czech-Syrian relations. The Czech Republic has been one of the very few countries which kept their ambassadors in Syria for the whole conflict. How important was that for you?
For many reasons, it's important. First of all, before the crisis, the relation with the Czech Republic wasn't warm. Actually, we had many differences. Most of the relation with most of the European countries was much better than the relation with your country. Actually, what happened during the crisis when most of the European countries adopted the Western propaganda against what's happening in Syria, your country kept his balance regarding this relation. That doesn't mean you support Syrian government or support Syrian president. This means you are playing the natural role that any government should play in keeping a relation even with its adversary. How can you play a role? How can you understand what's going on if you don't have relation? This is one aspect. The second aspect, Czech Republic is a small country and is part of the EU. And it was under severe pressure from many countries in the West, including the United States, to change its position, which sometimes could be only symbolic by keeping only embassy open. This could be symbolic in some cases. In spite of that, Czech Republic wanted to be independent. That's what we are missing in the world now. Most of the country, they're not independent. Most of the officials are not independent, especially in the West. So the other aspect, small country like Czech Republic could be independent, and that will bring the respect, and that has brought the respect within Syria to the position of your government, whether we agree with their position or not, and whether they agree with us or not. But at the end, you respect. So there's respect. There's kind of statesman behavior, let's say, regarding your politicians and your officials. Something is very important for us. Now, the third aspect, because of the credibility of your position, because many European governments recognize now and understand that you were right about what's going on in Syria and about keeping this open channel with the Syrian government, I think now they need your help in order to help them going back to the right track, especially regarding the political process. So it has many aspects, this balanced position regarding the situation in Syria.
One more aspect, President Zeman actually mentioned the possibility of signing eventual Syrian peace accord in Prague. Do you support this idea?
Of course, any effort supporting the solution of the crisis in Syria, especially from a credible government, we will be very happy to cooperate with, definitely.
But the symbolic meaning, I mean, like there are Geneva talks, there are talks in Vienna. Would it be signed in Prague? Do you think it's realistic?
Yeah, of course it's realistic, because now if you ask the Syrian people, they will say, I cannot have a peace conference in France, for example, because France support the terrorism and support the war. They don't support the peace. So, for example, well, if you mention Prague, of course there will be general acceptance of this idea because of the balanced position of your country.
After all what happened in Syria in those past few years, everybody has seen those horrible pictures. Do you have restless nights? Do you have bad dreams?
You live with this sadness every day. I mean, you live with the how to say, suffering of the people on a daily basis. Every hour you have this bad news. So it's becoming the atmosphere that you live in. But at the same time, the feeling of the Syrian people that one of the challenges of what's happening, not only to fight, not only to give political stand, but to live your daily life. And the most important example of that, the families of the martyrs in our country. You go and visit them, you look at them, they have strong will, and they try to live as much normal life as you can. So you cannot put yourself in that bubble of sadness. You have to live forward, to carry on your life, and to bring hope to the people. And you should be optimistic that you can solve the problem and bring back Syria to its normality.
Is there a space for doubts for a man in your position? Doubts about your deeds, about your steps you made?
About in the past, you mean, or the future?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah. If you ask yourself, if you...
Of course, you have to revise yourself every day. And if you look at the details, you always have details that you think about. You could always say that it must have been done in a better way, because you don't have maybe full wrong or full right. So what the percentage? This is something subjective. You change your mind about everything every day, but it depends on the situation. Especially when you don't have one separated factor. All the factors are related. So the balance between the different action that you take is not easy. You keep revising and you keep it changing. But I think the only real evaluation and objective evaluation will be after the end of the crisis. In the middle of the war, it's difficult to reach a conclusion about everything. So I think later, after the crisis, we can say exactly where we were wrong. We definitely do mistakes like any other human.
Where do you see Syria in 10 years?
In 10 years?
How do you see
the only option that we have is to defeat terrorism. There's no way. Second, to keep, as I said, the society, this intermingled society with its different colors. Third, to have reform in Syria. What the Syrian people want about their political system and their future. So I think, as I said, most important thing, secular. Second, more integrated than before the crisis. Although it was integrated, but you always have flaws in societies. So that's how I see it. And I hope prosperity.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Can you imagine a life without presidential office, maybe outside Syria even?
Yeah, for me, to be frank, I never cared about the position. And I don't care about it today or in the future. I never thought about it. Even before I became president, I never thought about the position. It's about what the Syrian people want. Now, in the middle of the war, I'm not going to say I'm leaving for any reason, unless the Syrian people want me to leave. If there's war, you have to do your job in order to protect your country. Otherwise, you are a traitor. That's not accepted for me or for the Syrian. When there's election, the Syrian people will decide. If they want me, I'll be happy to be president. If they don't want me, I'll be happy to leave it. I don't have any problem.
For 5 years, there have been discussions about your end. You're leaving the office. Sometimes it seemed that it is not a question if, but when. But after 5 years, yet you are still here. What do you have that leaders of Egypt, Tunisia, Libya didn't have?
The public support. Whenever you don't have public support, you cannot succeed, you will fail. If I want to talk about those presidents that you mentioned, they didn't have public support, while at the same time they had Western support at the very beginning. But when the West noted that there's no public support, they changed their position and they told them, you have to leave. While in Syria, the only thing that kept me in that position is the public support. Nothing else.
So maybe the place in history as an ultimate survivor?
Not survivor. I was very honest with the Syrian from the very beginning. I'm a very honest person. This is first. Second, it's very important for the people to know that they are fighting for their country and you are fighting with them, their war. You don't have your own war. They don't fight for me to be president. They don't fight for me to be in this position. I don't fight for myself to be in that position. That's something they know very well about me. Otherwise, if it's my war, if it's about my position, nobody will fight it. You won't have those people fighting in the ground and losing their life for this.
The last question, the most difficult one. When there will be peace in Syria?
When those countries that I mentioned, France, UK, US, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some others, stop supporting those terrorists. The other day, the situation will be better. In a few months, you will have full peace in Syria. Definitely.
Any time frame?
I told you in a few months, if they stop. If they don't stop, that about what the obstacles they're going to put. But in spite of these obstacles, we're going to win. But when, it's going to be difficult to answer.
Are you optimistic about that?
Of course, definitely. Otherwise, we wouldn't fight. If we don't have hope, we wouldn't have fought all that war as Syrians.
Many thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you for coming.